You will all receive, if you've registered for this workshop, you will all receive access to the recording in your email by tomorrow. So look out for that. Um, so yeah, thank you so much for being here. We're just gonna get straight into it because I have so much to cover. And I know you're really busy, like it's Monday afternoon, and I know that you're all taking time away from life to be here. So again, a massive thank you for sharing your time, and let's just get straight into it. So this is a quick outline of what we'll be covering today. We'll be talking about language around suicide and the responsibility that we all have around suicide, how we talk about it. And actually, this plays a really important part both in supporting people who've experienced loss, but also in terms of how we protect our children and prevent further suicide. Um, we're going to talk about how to differentiate normal teenage behavior from typical suicide warning signs. What are specific risk factors that make some teens more vulnerable to suicide? How to protect your child from suicide risks. So this is going to be the main focus, and this is really my expertise. I'm going to say from the outset, I am not an expert in suicide, and I have some knowledge about it and some experience working in it, but my expertise is really in parenting and connection and relationships. And that's what I'll be sharing a lot with you today about. You will be pointed in the direction of further support for yourself and for your teenager or your child if you need that in this presentation. And hopefully we will have time at the end for some Q&A. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please type them into the chat. Nivendra is on this call and he'll be fielding questions, and hopefully we'll have time for 2 or 3 questions at the end. Just bear in mind that there are a lot of people on the call, so if you could just minimize the chat as much as possible to really kind of essential questions that are going to be helpful for everybody, that would be really helpful in terms of picking out the most important ones to answer. Okay, so let's get into it. Some of you know who I am. Some of you maybe have no idea who I am. So just a quick introduction to me. I'm Jehan. I worked in an international school here in Colombo for 8 years as a school counselor and educator. I was also one of their safeguarding leads. I'm a certified transformational life coach and a family counselor. I'm a parent myself of 2 children who are 11 and 13. And currently I work as a parenting coach. My focus is in raising children who are resilient and in equipping parents to find what is often a really tricky balance between authoritarian parenting and permissive parenting. So I know parenting today is just harder than it's ever been. It's so much more complicated. And many of us are trying to let go of more traditional approaches to parenting, but we find ourselves slipping into very permissive or even neglectful parenting. So how do we find that really tricky balance? That's what I help parents do, to raise teenagers who are secure and resilient and confident. As I mentioned, we also have on this call Nivendra Uduman. Nivendra is a psychologist based here in Colombo. He has a special interest in suicide prevention, and he will also be answering questions for us, which are more geared towards mental health and suicide. So I just want to give a massive thank you and shout out to Nivendra for being here, and also to Anissa, who is just helping me manage all the Zoom things because I am not used to doing workshops like this with so many people. So very grateful to them for being here. Before we kick off into the nitty-gritty of the workshop, I'd really love to just take a moment to reflect all together on lives that we've lost too early, on people who are experiencing real struggle in their lives. I'd just love to invite you to join me in just a short moment of reflection, please. Okay, thank you. Also to say that if you are here because you have young people under your care, maybe you are a parent, maybe you're an educator, you work with children, maybe you have a special interest in suicide prevention professionally, maybe you're somebody who's just going through a hard time yourself. Everybody is welcome here, and you are absolutely in the right place if you're here. Okay, so suicide postvention, obviously this workshop is tailored towards prevention, but as I said, like so much of prevention is also around how we talk about suicide after we have seen it around us. And this is just to really invite you into your responsibility and leadership as adults, as parents, how to have conversations about this around your children, but also just for yourselves. So I'm going to just share a few things that are really unhelpful. And I know this might sound really obvious, but I think we all tend to slip into this sometimes. And it is really problematic. For example, rumors, gossip, assumptions that we make around suicide. And I know as humans, we are all naturally curious just by who we are. And there's curiosity to be informed. There's curiosity to be able to make better decisions and take responsibility. That's a really helpful curiosity. But curiosity can also slip into a more type of gossip type thing, which is really, really unhelpful. And very often we want to know, and we discuss our discussions around suicide are around like the details and the method and what happened. And those aren't really helpful. And in fact, they can be really harmful. We often want to know why somebody died by suicide, why they attempted suicide. And again, whilst this can be helpful for our own learning, so we can take responsibility, it can also lead to us pointing fingers and blaming certain individuals or organizations. And this is really, really hurtful and harmful. The truth is, suicide is complicated. There is never just one cause for it, and really trying to understand why can be really, really tricky. People who've lost loved ones to suicide often say that alongside the actual loss that they've experienced, what is sometimes just as or almost as harmful is the things people say about the person who died or about them, if they're the parents or people who, were responsible for looking after them. And that can feel really, really hurtful. So I'd just like us to kind of think about how we can shift more to compassion, for thinking about self-responsibility. What do we need to do? How can we take positive action? And understand that when we lose somebody, especially a young person, to suicide, like it is a collective responsibility. It's never one person's fault, and we all have a part to play. Our responsibility in how we speak about it around our children and around other people. Nivendra's going to just share a few thoughts about common misconceptions that we have about suicide. Over to you, Nivendra.
Thanks, Jehan. Hi, everyone. So just really quickly going through some of the common myths and misconceptions that we have, and really understanding what the factual elements of that are as well. So one of the common ones that we often hear from people around us is that if someone were to attempt suicide once, that means they won't attempt again, because a lot of people tend to believe that that person learned their lesson, or that person went through the consequences of attempting and therefore wouldn't attempt again. But that's far from the truth, because the truth is, if there's someone who has attempted suicide once, there's a really high risk of them attempting again, especially in the 1 year that follows after their attempt. So that's something just to keep in mind. And another thing that we often see, especially after a death that we often have in society by suicide, we hear people saying that that person really just wanted to end their life or die. But the truth is that a lot of people don't want to die, but they just want to end the pain that they are feeling, or they want to put an end to the suffering that they're going through, right? So it's not always about wanting to die. Another thing, and often this leads to why, as a society, we also miss or dismiss people who might show signs or behavioral indicators of um, the fact that they might be in emotional pain or they might be thinking about wanting to harm themselves in some way, is because we often equate suicide with depression, right? Now, while it is true, Jehan, can you hear me?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
While it is true that mental health problems does have a strong link with suicide, especially depression and things like bipolar disorder sometimes, doesn't mean that everyone who might think about suicide or attempt suicide would have a diagnosed mental health problem. Whereas sometimes it can be that it can be in the moment where they experience a really acute level of stress or experience a really acute crisis in that moment, and they can develop suicidal thoughts uh, in the moment as well. So it's not always about being linked with depression or another mental health problem. So it's just something to think about. And sometimes we believe, as people who are not health professionals, especially, that once a person decides to die by suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. But the fact is that it's the most preventable kind of death. So any positive action you take as a parent, as a member of society, as a member of your community, is actually helping someone else find hope to live. So those are some things for you to keep in mind as parents as well, because we often tend to get carried away sometimes with these myths because they've been so ingrained in our systems throughout the years. So it's about changing our approach and our mindset as well in how we think about mental health and suicide. So over to you, Jehan.
Great. Thank you, Navendra. So sometimes some of the language that we use around suicide can also be harmful. It creates more stigma. And the problem is whenever we have stigma around something, it kind of closes barriers to talk. It puts up barriers towards talking about it. Sometimes when children express suicide ideation, parents or adults around them will say things like, don't be stupid. Like, that's such a stupid thing to say. And when somebody is genuinely experiencing distress and they're already probably have low self-esteem and then they're being told that their feelings are stupid, can actually make them feel worse. Sometimes we use language around like it was selfish of that person to take their life because they're leaving behind people with pain. It was a choice that they made. And the truth is, people are experiencing unimaginable pain when they take their lives. And I don't think it's very easy to make a judgment on what they were going through. And I explained it to my daughter like this the other day. If somebody was starving, right, and there was a sandwich in front of them which belonged to somebody else, they would probably take that sandwich even though they know it's wrong. And it's kind of like that with suicide. It's not a rational choice somebody's making. It's a reaction to very, very severe pain that they're experiencing. We often hear people saying commit suicide, and the language has shifted to saying things like died by suicide, because again, that commit is like committing a crime, and suicide has been decriminalized. And again, it creates unnecessary stigma. So we say now died by suicide. Sometimes we say that people who express suicidal ideation are attention seeking, but the truth is we need to take every expression of suicide or wanting to die very seriously. And if somebody is seeking attention, it's because they need attention, right? So minimizing it or dismissing them is really, really unhelpful. And sometimes we think of people who've died by suicide as weak or cowardly. Again, their pain is exceeding their capacity to cope. I'm sure we have all experienced that at some point in our lives when we just feel so overwhelmed with a situation. And again, we don't want to be passing judgment, because the more people feel judged, the more distress they're going to feel. We need to be thinking about how to support them and helping them find access to help. These are just some examples of how we can shift the conversation to make it more productive and less harmful. So the cause of death was suicide. Suicide is really complicated. It's often associated with mental illness combined with other things, and there is always help available for someone struggling with mental illness. We want to keep in conversations with our children, keep reminding them that mental illness happens, that it's common, more common than we think, that there is help available. Okay. There are always other options for people who have suicidal thoughts, even though they may not be able to see that at the time. And that's really critical. Sometimes when we're in the depths of our pain, it's very hard to see a way out. But reminding our young people that no matter how hard things feel, there is always help for you, and all pain is temporary. There's always a way out, because sometimes young people just think this is it. And maybe we felt like that sometimes, like this is it for me, right? So it's about how do we help them see that there is a way out? Again, destigmatizing mental illness, because we've seen there is a correlation between mental illness and suicide. So the more we can destigmatize mental illness and help people see that it's common, that there is help available, that talking about it is a sign of strength and courage, not weakness, we're going to make them more resilient against suicide. When we're talking about a suicide that's happened, again, we want to take away that judgment. So saying X was probably experiencing a huge amount of pain, we can never know what they're going through, and making assumptions is hurtful to their family. What we can do is reach out to friends who may be having a hard time. So again, shifting that focus to how to be supportive, how to be proactive, how to take responsibility. And I think this is the most important one we want to share with our children, is that if you are ever going through a hard time, I want you to know I'm always here for you, and we will figure it out together. One of the biggest triggers of suicide is loneliness. And when somebody feels alone with their pain, that makes them so vulnerable to suicide. So helping them, as parents, we can't always fix things. We can't take away their pain sometimes, but helping them to know that they are never alone in it, that we are with them in it, is such a strength. So why are teens so vulnerable? Well, if you think back to your teenage days, it's a tricky time, like school stress, they've got exams. It's when they have their first experience often of romantic relationships. And there's so much reliance on peers. Their friends mean the world to them. And when there's some conflict or somebody stops talking to them, it can feel like the end of their world. Social media and how teens are interacting with social media, the unrealistic standards they see online, the exposure that they have to things like suicide and self-harm online, cyberbullying, but also to remember that on social media, there are positive things. Teens often have access to support and really positive connections online. So we don't want to just label all social media as bad, but we definitely, as parents, have a responsibility to have conversations with our children about what they're looking at online. The teenage brain is underdeveloped, and it doesn't fully develop until the mid to late 20s. And the thinking and planning and rationalizing part of their brain is underdeveloped. And the emotional and impulsive part of their brain that seeks more thrills and wants to take more risks is super overreactive. And this just makes teenagers, because of their brain, so much more vulnerable. Teenagers don't grasp the permanence of their actions. They just don't understand the consequences, and they're not able to think through, because of their brain, because of their limited life experience, they're not able to think through how permanent their actions are. And then they don't have yet developed coping strategies. They don't know that when I'm upset or when I'm angry, these are things I can do to help me feel better. And as parents, we can help them to develop those coping strategies so that they don't feel so overwhelmed. And like Nivendra said, some of the suicides that we see are very reactionary. It's like something's happened in my life, maybe a breakup, maybe some bullying is happening, and that's it. I can't handle it. This is the only option. Okay, so how do we help them cope with the inevitable ups and downs of life? Helping our children to identify a support network. So I have conversations often with my children, like, if this happened, who would you go to? If this happened, who would you go to? Various different scenarios. And I also say to them, if I was doing something that was upsetting you, who would you go to? Because I don't want me to be the only person in their support network. So helping them identify trusted adults. And yes, their friends are great, but remember, they also need at least one or two adults in their support network. When I worked with teens, what I often saw was so many children had not one adult in their support network. It was all friends or their peers. And that's great. But remember, their peers also have limited life experience and wisdom. So if it's not me you want to speak to, which teacher is it at school? And naming a specific teacher that they would feel comfortable to go to, or another member of the family, or a family friend, or somebody. So having those conversations with their children, with your children. Limited life experience to know that things can get better. Teenagers haven't experienced enough ups and downs in life to know that we do go through downs. Like bad stuff happens in life and we move through it. They don't understand that. So again, helping them to see that they are resilient, that yes, things are hard sometimes, but it's never the end of the story. So what's normal and what's not normal in teenagers? Because one of the things parents who have lost children to suicide say is that I thought they were just being a typical teenager, right? And in teenage and adolescence, we see behavioral changes, social and emotional changes happening in our children. And that's a lot of it's normal, right? So we see them being moody, more ups and downs. We see them more irritable, more snappy. They want to put more distance. Maybe they don't want to hang out with you as much. They don't want to tell you everything that's going on in their lives. Maybe we see them wanting to play around with risk a little bit more. And this is all a natural part of adolescent development. Where we can be a bit concerned is when we hear or see in their behavior like real dramatic changes, or maybe even subtle changes, but things that indicate hopelessness, worthlessness, and a complete withdrawal from friends and activities. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what this looks like when we talk about risk factors. These are not typical manifestations of typical teenage angst. So when we start to hear or see in their behavior sense of hopelessness, worthlessness, or isolation, that is something to pay more attention to. You know your child. You spend time with your child. You trust your instincts. If their behavior is going beyond these usual typical patterns, then pay attention and consider seeking some professional advice. So like I said, these three things are what make teenagers really vulnerable to wanting to die by suicide. So what are the warning signs? It may be things that they say verbally, and it may be very direct things like, I'm going to kill myself. But it often is more indirect, like, I wish I could fall asleep and never wake up again. Or I won't be a problem for you much longer. Right? We need to be paying attention to some of the things that teenagers might be saying subtly, but maybe even not so subtly. Statements indicating hopelessness or worthlessness, like I'm no use to anyone, or I'm no good to anyone. What's the point? Okay, these are kind of phrases that we want to be paying attention to. Suicide notes and plans. Sometimes teenagers will indicate online that they want to take their life. And this is where we can have conversations with our own children about helping our children, because we might not see those messages, but another child will. So having conversations with your teen around, if you see something like this, even if it's a complete stranger, let me know, because we need to take those signs really seriously. Preoccupation with death, maybe suddenly they're really curious about death, like what happens after we die, or they're drawing pictures about death. Maybe there's something they've written at school that is like talking about death, right? And I'm not saying if they draw a picture or they write something, it means that they want to die, but it's worth having a conversation about some of those things. Then behavioral cues. Like Navendra said, where there has been prior suicidal behavior, in particular that 1 year afterwards, they are at more risk. And sometimes when they have tried to take their life and it's been unsuccessful, there can be a lot of stigma and shame that they are facing with, and this can make them super, super vulnerable. So it's really important also how we are offering non-judgment, but offering support and compassion to somebody who may have tried to die by suicide. Um, Making final arrangements. Okay, they might be suddenly thinking about or talking about funerals or giving away some of their favorite things. Social withdrawal and isolation. They're just cutting themselves off from you, from their friends. Extreme mood swings or irritability that goes beyond the normal kind of teenage behavior. An increase in self-destructive or reckless behavior. Maybe if they're driving and suddenly they're like driving really fast, or they're using a lot of substances, or self-harm. Okay, self-harm is not always directly correlated with suicide, but teenagers can accidentally die from self-harm that's gone to extreme. Um, and also um, and also sometimes self-harm can start very sort of slow, and then as it increases, and like self-harm is like an addictive behavior. So often we need to do more of it to have the same effect. And this is where, when it becomes more extreme, we need to watch out for where it can lead to suicidal behavior. Sometimes what parents who've lost children say is they seemed fine suddenly. And sometimes it's that sudden calm or peace after a period of distress, because the person is like relieved because they know that they're about to die, and there's that sense of relief. So we need to watch out where they've been distressed for a long time and suddenly there's this sense of peace. We need to be mindful of that. Um, Other behavioral signs of not necessarily suicidal intent, but just that your child might be distressed, might be struggling with depression, is like a decline in grades. Perhaps they're not able to focus and concentrate, loss of interest in school activities that they previously enjoyed, loss of interest in hygiene and appearance, chronic headaches, stomach aches with no obvious medical reason, lethargy, fatigue, like just not either sleeping too much or not being able to sleep. All of these are signs that your child may be in distress. Other risk factors, things that mean children might be more likely to try to die by suicide, is having the means for suicide. Okay, so a lot of the literature talks about firearms. I'm not sure if that's such a big thing in Sri Lanka, but certainly medication, securing their environment. The more accessible something is, and the more they've been exposed to it, the more likely they are to be at risk. Any sort of trauma, abuse, violence, family, stress, separation, bullying, either online or in school, anything they're struggling with gender and sexuality, the discrimination that they might face around this, the rejection that they might face around this, racism, bullying, all of these things are likely to make children more at risk. So it's just worth, if your child is experiencing any of these things, just being more present, being more attuned, having conversations, and considering whether they need some kind of external support. Depression and mental illness, we've discussed, can be correlated with suicide. A family member or friend who has died by suicide, this can increase somebody's risk quite significantly. And this leads me to talk about suicide contagion and suicide clusters. So suicide contagion basically means that when somebody is exposed more to the idea of suicide, either through a family member, a friend, something they've seen in the media, something they've seen online, perhaps even something that they've read about or seen in a movie, it puts the idea in their head that this is an option. Okay, so when they've been exposed to it, and that's the contagion, or when they've seen somebody else do it, it can have this contagious effect. And suicide clusters are what we've seen recently, where two or three more people have died in a similar way, in a very short time frame. Okay. And this puts a massive responsibility on the discussions that we had, which is why what I said at the beginning is really, really important. It's less about talking about the method that somebody died, or like, how they did it. and why they did it, but more about how do we seek support? How do we build resilience? Okay, because our children are exposed to a lot of conversations around the method and the details of suicide, which can make it seem like more of a viable option. I will say this is not the same as having a conversation with your child about like, an empathetic discussion around somebody was going through a hard time. We have to give them the fact. Somebody was going through a hard time. They ended their life, and then shifting the conversation to what can we do to support people? What can you do if you ever feel like you're going through a hard time? Okay, it's not the same as asking somebody, talking about suicide in a really empathetic way, or when you are concerned that your child is going through a hard time, asking them that question. And I'm going to come to that later. Okay, how do we bring up that question with our children if we suspect that they might be at risk? This is what parents who have lost children by suicide say, right? This is what they say where they may have gone wrong or what they would have, maybe signs that they missed. And it might be minimizing or misinterpreting behaviors. For example, they might say things like, I thought they were just being a typical teenager, right? So not kind of misinterpreting that typical teenage behavior. They may have dismissed comments that their child made, and maybe said things like, stop being dramatic, don't be attention seeking, fear of confronting the topic. As a parent, it is so heartbreaking when you see your child going through something difficult. And sometimes we just simply, like, it's very hard to know how to handle those things. Parents sometimes say, I was afraid to bring it up. I thought it would make it worse. Whereas a lot of the evidence shows that when we do bring it up, it gives our children space to talk about it and to not feel alone with their feelings and to have that support. Not knowing how to handle a child's pain. I felt helpless, out of my depth. So I didn't really do anything because I didn't know what to do. And this is why, as parents, it's also so important that we are seeking the support we need. Underestimating the emotional pain, assuming that it will pass, assuming that this is just a part of life. Yes, feelings pass. Yes, it is a part of life, but we also need to ensure that our children are getting the help. Delay in getting professional help or over reliance on informal support. Informal support might mean family members, or maybe, but not professional support, not people who are trained to be able to help your child. And maybe often we think I didn't think it was serious enough, or I thought I could handle it. I didn't want to make it worse by making my child think they had a problem. Sometimes there is nothing that parents could have seen. Sometimes they are just completely blindsided because sometimes our children are really good at masking. They seem fine and they put on a brave front and we don't know there's anything wrong. And sometimes parents are busy, right? Like you've got your own stress, you've got a million things that are going on in your life. And sometimes we just don't have the space, or we don't create the space to be really present with our children. And we miss the signs. So how do we support our young people? Well, you're all here, and that is such a wonderful first step. You're all here raising your own awareness, educating yourself. And that is the first step to taking responsibility and being supportive to your child. Getting comfortable with talking about it. It is such a taboo. Suicide is such a taboo. And we have the misconception that by talking about it will make it worse. Okay. But if we talk about it in a calm, non-judgmental way, take the emotion out of it, and if we suspect that our child is under a lot of stress, they are really distressed, they're going through some event in their life, it might be a breakup, it might be bullying, it might be they're really struggling with something. And to just say to them, I know you've been under a lot of stress, and I just wondered if you ever think about hurting yourself when you're feeling this way. You're not going to plant the idea in their head. It's okay to ask them. Like I said, it gives them a space to discuss it and not feel alone. Listen and validating to them, to their feelings without judgment, without dismissing, without trying to fix it. This is the hardest thing because sometimes with the best intentions, what we do is we dismiss our child's feelings. We say, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. It'll pass. It's not a big deal. Or we give them a ton of advice. Oh, you should do this, or have you done this? Or why don't you do this? And actually, we're not just allowing them to share their feelings, and they can feel more isolated when we do that. Or we judge them, we judge their feelings instead of just holding space for them. We can also remove access to means where possible, securing their environment, removing any pills or medication that could be harmful to them. Staying connected, being present, fostering open communication every single day, showing them that they're not alone, that we are available to hear them, we are available to talk to them. And very often, parents who have teenagers say, I try, but they won't talk to me. Like your teens don't want to talk to you as much as you try. And that's really hard. You can't force anybody to talk to you. You just can't. You can't force them. But it's about creating the relationship with them where you trust that when they need to and when something is wrong, that they will come and talk to you. If they're not talking to you, it's either because they don't need to or because they don't have that emotional safety. How can you make them feel emotionally safe? And it is through the things I just said, not dismissing them, helping them feel heard, not judging them. From the teens I work with, I would always try to encourage them to go and talk to their parents. And the one thing they would so often say is there's no point because my parents just judge me. They don't understand, or they're going to punish me if I tell them because I've done something wrong. They'll take away my phone. They'll do this or that. So there isn't that safety. It's more of a fear kind of thing when they don't want to tell their parents. So how can you create that relationship with your child while still being the parent, while still being the leader, but so that you are the one they want to come and tell when they're struggling. And if it's not you, help them find somebody else. Discouraging too much alone time. And again, this is tricky because at the same time, we want to respect their space and their privacy. But when our child is completely isolating themselves from family, from even their friends, positive relationships in their life, we want to encourage them to start to re-engage without forcing, but through having supportive conversations. We want to be aware of what they're doing online. Remember, screen time is a privilege, it's not a right. And very often we are overprotecting our children in the real world. We're not allowing them to take safe, healthy risks in the real world, like walking somewhere on their own, crossing a road, even like going to the supermarket on their own. These are really positive things for our children to be able to do to build their independence, their competence, their confidence, their resilience. And often we're not allowing them to do these things in real life. And then online, we don't really know what they're doing. They're exposed to all kinds of risks. So just trying to find that balance and ensuring there are times when they're unplugged from their devices. Family meal times, at another big risk factor is sleep deprivation. Are your teenagers do they have devices in their room, phones or laptops at night when they should be sleeping? Like, think about the limits and the boundaries around that and making sure that they're spending that they've got the balance with other things. Friends, okay? Like I said earlier, just having your child keep an eye on their friends, knowing who their friends are, knowing if any of their friends are going through a hard time, asking them those questions. Is there anybody in your class who's going through a hard time at the moment? Because that child might not tell their parents, but if your child tells you, you can then do something about it. Having their friends over at your place. So you get to know their friends, but also you're creating more connection with your own child when you do that. Identifying support networks, like I said, who are the adults, but also the other children, who are the, and specific names of people, draw it out with them, write down the names of people. And making sure they have safety lines. If you're ever feeling super distressed, who is the one, who are the people you can reach out to? Making sure that they've got their phone numbers, that they know how to reach out to those people. And if it's not people, organizations, I'm going to share some crisis hotline numbers with you as well. And then helping your child develop healthy coping strategies, and you also talking to them about the things you do. Do you talk to your children about when you've had a hard day and what helped you feel better? Or when you're feeling really rubbish about something, how did you think about it? How did you process it? How did you come out of it? Okay, but helping your child develop healthy coping strategies, because so often our children resort to unhealthy ones. Things like substances and self-harm and like gaming, all these things are things that our children do to avoid or numb their pain. Um, and as a result, they don't develop healthy coping strategies. And then super basic but healthy lifestyle, like your child's mood is so dependent on their sleep, exercise, and nutrition they're getting, and how you're modeling that as well. Okay, like I said, how do you model your struggles, your challenges, sharing really intentionally and age appropriately some of the things you're going. So your child gets to see that your life is not perfect, your life is not easy, that life is sometimes hard. But how we navigate that is really important. Helping them see your imperfections. There's so much pressure on children to be perfect. They're comparing themselves with some perfect ideal online that they're seeing. Help them see you also make mistakes, you fail, and how you come out the other side. Emphasizing their strengths. Children these days don't really have a strong concept of who they are, their self-concept. What are their strengths? What makes them them? Okay, so finding ways to really celebrate who they are, affirm their character, how funny they are, or how thoughtful they are, and how courageous they are. Helping them to see themselves as this person, creating a sense of belonging, because isolation, like I said, and loneliness are the biggest risk factors. How can we help our children feel like they are such a valuable member of our family? How can we make them feel more included in school? How can we connect them with faith groups? How can we make sure that the belonging, that their belonging in social groups is positive? Because when children are in distress, or teenagers generally can be very susceptible and vulnerable, particularly if they have low self-esteem, to being drawn into unhealthy social groups online, even in person. So making sure that they have a sense of belonging, at the very least in their family, and letting them know what an important family they are. And having rituals that give them that sense of belonging as well. And the most important one is faith and spirituality. When we know that we have a meaning and a purpose for our life beyond just my own life, it gives my life so much value. Like me sitting here today delivering this workshop gives me meaning and purpose. It helps me see the value that I have to bring. And we want our children to realize that their lives are so valuable. And they may not see it yet. They may think they're completely useless right now, but they are born with a purpose. They were created with a purpose. And also with faith, and faith gives us hope, right? And strength, that we're not just relying on ourselves, but there is something bigger. There's somebody or something more powerful that is helping us when it feels like our own strength is not enough. So exploring some of those ideas with your children in a way that feels really aligned to your family is such a strength. That is what I've shared with you about things you can do. And it really is just an overview. I hope that it's given you, I hope that it's really validated things that you're already doing. and you can really just celebrate that you're already doing those things. I hope it's also given you a couple of insights of things you can maybe do a little bit more of or do a little bit differently. And Navendra is going to share a really useful thing that you can do in the moment to teach your child how to regulate their emotions when they are feeling really dysregulated. And this is so important because, like he said, sometimes suicide happens, but such a reaction and an impulse to a distressing moment. So, Navendra, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So, what I'm going to share with you is a really simple but very, very powerful set of skills that you can use for yourself, but you can also teach your children and to model using these kinds of skills as well when they are in distress. So, these skills are meant to be used when someone is in a crisis or if they're experiencing really, really intense emotions, to be able to bring that emotional intensity down really quickly, right? So if you ever had training in how to deal with a fire, you would have learned these three words: stop, drop, and roll, right? That's what we are taught when we catch on fire or we ourselves on fire. So similarly, when we are on emotional fire, when we are burning emotionally, stop, drop, and roll are three skills that we can use. So stop. If we talk about stop, one of the primary things for you to remember as parents is that a crisis, emotional crisis or a mental health crisis, when someone is in real intense pain, often lasts for about 24 to 48 hours. That is what we might call the crisis period, right? Doesn't mean that it wouldn't go longer than that, but generally that distress tends to come down in the 24, 48 hours that follows something happening, right? So encouraging young people to not make hasty decisions on that time, during that time, to not engage in impulsive behavior. So basically stop means stop doing what you're doing, stop thinking, stop moving, but just stay still. So that's your first step. So your drop is where you drop the body's temperature really quickly using cold water, because cold water or ice water rather is shown to be really effective in bringing a physiological arousal down really quickly, right? So that our emotional intensity also drops very, very fast down. So if you have an ice pack at home that you use for injuries, for example, you can get your child to hold the ice pack just above their eyes, around the forehead, this area, for a few minutes, take a bit of a break, hold that over there again. If you don't have ice pack available, you can just grab ice as you would normally use with the cloth, do the same thing. Cold water is really effective. Just getting under the shower, if there's nothing to do at that time, or if you don't have other resources handy, just getting under the shower, cold shower, even with your clothes on, is a really good way to bring down that distress really quickly as well, right? But the most effective way to use cold water would be to fill a basin with cold water. When I say cold, really, really ice water, with ice cubes in it as well, if you can. And then this part of the face, so you're not going to put your whole head in, but just this part of the face, you're going to take a nice deep breath and dunk your face in the water for about 30 seconds while holding your breath, taking your head out, taking a break, and then going over that for about 5 cycles can be really helpful as well in quickly calming down. Okay, so that's your drop step. And then roll is about rolling your eyes and making eye contact with another human being, because that can be a really powerful way for us to get out of our heads, right? So, for example, it doesn't always have to be in person where you talk to someone or you make eye contact with someone in person, but it can be virtually as well. So, for example, Jehan and I can make eye contact through our computer screens, and that can be a really helpful way for me to get out of my head and focus on another person or something else, right? Or you can encourage your child, or you can do it yourself as well, where you actually ask the other person, perhaps even on a video call, or if there's someone available face to face, to help you get out of your head. All right. If nothing is available, if you can't video call anyone, if you can't get on Zoom or FaceTime with someone, or if you can't see eye to eye with someone in person, even just watching a YouTube video where there are people and looking at that can be a really powerful way of kind of getting out of that headspace as well. So those are 3 steps to consider for yourself. And it doesn't have to mean that you have to come to that point of crisis to use it. These can be skills that are practiced sustainably over time so that during a crisis, it becomes more natural for someone to go towards using these skills. So that's what we would really like for your children, to be able to have these skills as practices that they would engage in regularly rather than just an emergency intervention when there is a crisis. So I hope that was clear and that you kind of got a picture of what the stop drop roll steps are. Can be really powerful. I've used it myself when I've had difficult moments, especially the cold water, and that's been really, really effective. So yeah, Jehan, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Navendra. Yeah, just for regulating the nervous system. This is such
Yep.
powerful tools.
Yep.
Okay, so just to summarize, 3 words for you: love. Our children need to know that they are unconditionally loved, regardless of their performance, their achievements, the mistakes they make, the failures. They are just loved because they exist, and really separating our love for them from how they perform and how they show up, and just letting them know that no matter what, they're loved. Listening to them, being present, being attentive. Like, what if your child is in distress and they're trying to make eye contact with you and then like you're on your phone? And I must admit, I'm guilty of that so often. Okay, but how can we, when we are at least certain moments of the day, being present with our children and being there to really listen, listening not just to the words they say, but listening to their behavior, listening to the things that they don't say, that they don't talk about. Okay, it takes effort, I know, and it takes intention. And then leadership. How are we showing up? Are we taking care of ourselves? Because our children will learn to take care of themselves when they see what that looks like in our lives. How are we showing responsibility? What are we role modeling to our children? Okay, and how are we being leaders for our children to emanate? So 3 words to really keep with you as you think about how to keep your children safe. Before we jump onto Q&A, we will have a couple of minutes, hopefully, for Q&A for those of you who are able to stay on. But I see Navendra's been very busy in the chat answering your questions. But there is a crisis hotline number in Sri Lanka. It's 1333 CCC crisis hotline with trained counselors specifically for people who are in crisis. Share this number with your children. Make sure you know that there is support available, and it's 24 hours. It's free of charge. If you think your child is in imminent risk, if they have said that they want to die by suicide, that they've said that they have a plan and they're going to do it, you need to take them to a hospital and admit them under the care of a psychiatrist. Okay. And I think Navendra said if they're under 12 years old, you can take them to Lady Ridgeway, otherwise any other hospital. Navendra's email is there. And like I said, he's a psychologist. He works with adults and adolescents. And he is, has a special interest in supporting people with suicide prevention. So there's his email. And then Child and Adolescent Family Services have a team of psychologists and people, even with like learning support issues and other things like that. There's their number there. And Giselle Das is the person to contact at CAFS. If you are after more parenting support, like I saw questions about social media and connecting with children. This is where I support parents. So I have a parenting community. It's currently free to join. It's called the Empowered Parents Club. I offer free monthly trainings in there. We have guest experts who come and do sessions. I have live Q&As, and it's a really supportive community. It's a Facebook group. Like I said, it's free to join. There's a QR code there, and I will also share details of that in the email that I'll send out later with the recording. But some of you maybe are after a little bit more in-depth and supportive support after this session. So I'm offering you a 6-week parenting program. It's a group program called Abide, and it's specifically to build emotional resilience and self-worth in your preteen or your teen. So anywhere from age 8 upwards, without overprotecting, without controlling them. You'll learn proven strategies to nurture a deeply supportive relationship, strengthen their mental health, and support them to face challenges. So in this, you get 6 weekly trainings with parenting strategies to build resilience. You get 3 days a week direct messaging access to me to work through any current challenges. And you get a one Q&A or coaching call to have your questions answered. This program will start on Tuesday next week, so in 8 days' time. Normally, this program would be $497. I'm offering it just for you guys for $197, the whole thing, if you confirm by Thursday. And if you know you want this and you're ready to commit, then I have a fast action special for you, which is only $97 if you secure your spot by today at 8 p.m. If you're interested in more information, you can click, I'll share the link with you in the email, but there's a QR code there, which will take you to a page where you can sign up, secure your place. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to drop me a DM on Instagram or Facebook or email me. The 6 topics that we'll cover in this are understanding your teen's behavior. We're going to look at self-worth, identity, and belonging. How to have positive, open communication to build trust and emotional safety, managing screen time and social media, setting limits without fighting, and facing challenges and setbacks in life with confidence. Other resources which you may find really useful are Jonathan Haidt is fantastic. He talks a lot about anxiety in this current generation. He talks a lot about smartphones and social media and the impact it's having on our children, and gives really useful recommendations. So this book of his is excellent. You can also find him on social media. And if you want some more guidance on how to have conversations about suicide with your children, then Winston's Wish is a really helpful website, which will give you guidance following bereavement. So, quick recap. We've talked about the need for sensitivity and leadership in suicide and conversations that we have around suicide prevention. We've talked about warning signs and risk factors for young people. We've talked about creating a loving, open, emotionally safe relationship to safeguard your teen. And hopefully you feel encouraged to know that there is support for you available. For you, for your child, you know, in the moment, but also in terms of building up longer skills and resilience, there is support available for you. So I just want to say a massive thank you again to everybody for sharing your time today, to Navendra as well for being here, and Anissa and Okwi if he's here. If you will receive the recording in your email, connect with me on Instagram if you're not already, where I do share lots of free parenting stuff, and on Facebook as well. And Navendra, are there any more questions that you would like to address directly here? I see you've been answering them in the chat.
Yeah, I think I've answered pretty much everything that was asked in the chat. If anyone else has any questions they want to turn on their if they want to put it on the chat, you can do that. I'll be still happy to, or Jehan and I can answer. If anyone else has questions, please do shoot them our way.
Okay, I'm going to also stop this recording.